They were right. It really does all come back to the L sharp. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2022 music horror comedy, Studio 666. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Studio 666 stars Dave Grohl and the rest of the Foo Fighters and was directed by McDonnell. It tells the story of the Foo Fighters as they move into an Encino mansion to record an album only to discover the house's dark and grisly secret. Studio 666 is one of those movies that sounds fake, like somebody made it up as a mock poster in the background of some silly comedy. A Foo Fighters horror comedy? It's something that you couldn't even dream up, yet it's real. And it's in theaters with a wide enough release that it actually made it up to Maine, albeit with random Spanish subtitles that I don't think were intentional. I've been a Foo Fighters fan for decades now, so when I saw that this movie was a thing, a real thing, I knew that I had to see it, no matter how ridiculous it seemed. Unsurprisingly, this is an incredibly niche movie. It targets a very specific audience, but it's the kind of movie that won't even appeal to that whole target audience. But it also won't appeal to most people outside of that target audience. So this movie is one that's difficult to review in a traditional film criticism sense. It's not a good movie, but that's kind of the point, and certainly part of the charm for people who do end up connecting with it. It's incredibly self-aware and doesn't take itself seriously at all. While paying loving homage to a variety of other horror movies, Studio 666 very consciously makes fun of itself, the Foo Fighters, and music industry stereotypes, without ever losing its irreverence or becoming mean-spirited. It's just ridiculous absurdity. This is one of those films that general audiences won't get, and will end up hating. But it's also one of those films that's so niche that general audiences aren't even gonna go see it. You can't go into this movie with a critical mindset, because it's just not a movie intended for that. This is a hangout movie for Foo Fighters fans. A movie designed to be seen with a rowdy group of friends and some adult beverages. With all that in mind, I went into this movie with the intent to review, so I'm gonna attempt that despite the film's existence to the contrary. Studio 666 has got a really fun concept. Utter nonsense, but fun. At least for fans of the band. Because there's this whole extra layer of fun when you realize just how meta this movie is. The story revolves around the band trying to record their 10th album, and wanting to make it epic and unique, so they go off to record in a kinda creepy Encino mansion to capture a different sound. And the real Foo Fighters just released their actual 10th album, Medicine at Midnight, which they recorded at a kinda creepy mansion in Encino. The very same creepy Encino mansion that they shot Studio 666 in. It's a fun connection and a fun premise for a film, but it's a story short on substance. This could have made a killer short film, or even hour-long special, but it just doesn't work quite as well when stretched out to feature length. Given that this film not only centers on, but stars the Foo Fighters, the frequently stiff performances and stilted line deliveries were to be expected, and honestly were something that I was able to overlook. These guys aren't actors after all, they're musicians, and certainly deliver some great music throughout the movie. Plus, it's not like any of their performances were awful. They're awkward, but that works because it's kind of in line with the movie's self-awareness. Something that's harder to overlook, however, is the script. Beyond the fun premise, it's a bit of a mess. The dialogue is rough, with a lot of jokes falling flat, which certainly doesn't help the performances any. But the biggest script issue is the story structure. It takes way too long to get going, repeatedly stalling out on a repetitive writer's block recording flip-out pattern. And then when it does get going with its supernatural story, it just keeps going, with several endings that make the film feel quite a bit longer than it actually is. The story at Studio 666's center isn't the most impressive, and it's not all that scary or funny, but it does sport some surprisingly gruesome special effects and gnarly kills. Not all of the effects are great. The CG ones look almost intentionally bad at times, though I'll admit the shadow demons were effectively creepy. But the practical effects were actually really solid. There are some gross out moments, and also some unexpectedly over the top moments of gore, too. There's one scene in particular involving a chainsaw that's particularly creative and gruesome. So, Studio 666 is just a weird movie to talk about in a review setting, and honestly, just a weird movie, period. Some people are really gonna love it and feel like it was custom made just for them. But most people probably aren't gonna like it all that much. It's a movie that will appeal to a very specific target audience. So if you're not already a Foo Fighters fan, I don't know how big of a draw this will be for you. Really, this is a film that's going to depend entirely on what you hope to get from it. If you're expecting scares or a good movie, you're bound to be underwhelmed. But if you're looking for a ridiculous and weird time with the Foo Fighters, this could be a lot of fun for you. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is the concept. As absurd and ridiculous as this movie is, it's definitely got a very fun premise. The Foo Fighters playing themselves in a movie is wild enough, but then sticking them in a supernatural horror comedy that parallels the recording of their actual 10th album? The story and supernatural plot aren't the greatest, and the execution is even more shaky, but the wacky absurdity and general unbelievability that this film even exists is certainly a draw for Foo Fighters fans. The second pro has gotta be the practical effects. I came into this movie expecting a silly horror comedy, but I was not at all anticipating the gory gruesomeness. It's all done comedically, in a very over-the-top manner, but there's a ton of blood, flesh, and gross-out chills that culminate in some surprisingly brutal and creative kills, which surpass the seeming quality of the rest of the film. On the con side, there's a lot you could dig into if you really wanted to, but the biggest issue is the script, which actually encompasses a number of things. The dialogue is pretty poorly written at times, and the plot itself isn't the most interesting once the general concept has been laid out. But the biggest problem is the structure. After setting up the basic premise, it takes way too long to dive into the horror elements. There's a lot of repetition through the middle of the film that, while being entertaining the first time around, quickly becomes a bit monotonous. There are some promising ideas here, and I think some rearranging and shortening could have gone a long way. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Studio 666 or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Studio 666 3 out of 5 paws. Just as this was a difficult film to review, it's also a difficult one to rate. It has some great gory kills and a fun premise, but is lacking in most other regards. However, in the right mood and situation, this could be a blast. I would recommend Studio 666 to fans of the Foo Fighters, who also like horror, but want a fun, self-aware, and irreverent, supernaturally gory time. Like I said, this film is pretty niche, and if you aren't in that super specific target audience, I think you'll be a bit disappointed. If you liked Studio 666, I would recommend Evil Dead 2. It doesn't feature musicians, but it's a wacky, gory horror comedy that centers around a group of people who unleash demons while staying in a rented home. If you like the supernatural writer's block side of things, you might want to check out The Shining. Very little comedy and no over-the-top gore, but it does focus on the supernatural susceptibility of an artist. And if you're interested in another rock horror, you should watch Green Room. The comedy is absent once again, but it's a brutal and chilling movie about a punk band who find themselves being hunted. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Studio 666? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite Foo Fighters song? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information on this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.